cultural storytelling is not enough unless you also combine that with policy research and give specific solutions. So we do policy research, particularly in education and going forward in ecology as well. And thirdly, we invest in people. We work with young people to develop leadership potential in them for a civilizational cause. We do this through direct courses that we offer on civilizational issues, and also mentoring support and just being there to have a dialogue. So that's the idea of converting the movement into an epoch, or how we plan or how we think the yearning that all of us share can be converted into something substantial. It is not going to be easy. This is intergenerational work. Right? We are absolutely clear, and we have no illusion that this is going to be just done in a year or two. There is no reason why we feel that we cannot carry out our own policy making. There is no reason to feel that we are not competent to actually handle our own governance matters. If the Britishers were to tell us that in a country like India, since you do not have the experience of running a democratic government yourself, is it not better to just have Britishers continue doing that for us? Don't let anyone ever tell you that we are not good enough to govern ourselves. So the job of supplying Indian state with Indian knowledge system based frameworks is just to make sure that the state is representing the aspirations that we naturally have as a civilization, and with full respect and recognition that you cannot do without the instrument called state.
Why was an independent and indigenous think tank needed when many Indian works in well-established think tanks?
Thank you, and very happy to have made contact with this young group of bright people trying to generate a civilizational discourse in the IIT Kharagpur campus. Very happy to be talking to you guys. Now, the question, I know the place it comes from, and it's a very student question, very pertinent, about what is the need. Right? Is there a proliferation of this? Is there a fatigue? Why do we need something on the cultural lines? I would say you need to think about it in two different axes. So you have, clearly, like you said, a lot of people who are working on this, and all of them are doing what they can. And we should always start with that belief that everyone has their own moral agency, and they are working towards things that they consider important. And all of this is required for nation building. There is no question about it. Right? But when I looked at the landscape, if you will, right, you think about different kinds of worldviews. Whether it is a political philosophy based, or whether it is based on international relations, based on geostrategies. Everyone has their expertise, but there is going to be a cultural turn for public policy. And this is not just a movement that we're witnessing in India, and I will come to what we're witnessing in India a little bit more specifically, but you see what's happening with the entire paradigm of public policy itself. If you think about public policy, you went through three different waves, right? First one was the neoclassical wave. It has a certain theory of self, of man as a rational being, and all of us maximizing our utility based on certain choices that we are able to exercise. Then you had the introduction of behavioral economics, which sort of upended some of those assumptions, because it said that we're not really so rational. A lot of our work is actually based on the subconscious mind and emotions, and a lot of other latent, hidden factors actually drive our decision making. That field got further pushed with the advances in neurosciences. Right? You understand that there are certain functions of the brain. The research is unfortunately still at this time largely focused on the brain, which is where the Indian knowledge systems is so critical, because it has the best theory of the mind, it has the best research on mind. So you see that these have been the three waves, and you could broadly correspond that with the paradigms of public policy also. You had the whole Weberian approach, then you had the new public management approach, and then you had the good governance approach. Increasingly, even in the Western academia now, there is a recognition that public policy will take a cultural turn. In fact, this is being called by Professors Michael Muthukrishna and others as the cultural behavioral evolutionary paradigm of public policy. That culture and how we think as human beings, the decisions that we make, are inextricably linked. A lot of choices that we exercise, a lot of things that we think we are doing based on our own worldview is informed very subliminally by the co-evolution of culture and nature. So this is something that I found missing, and this is at a overall discipline level. But think about the questions that have begun to animate the public discourse in India. For example, the temple control movement. It was not on the horizon, let's say, 10 years ago, right? At least I was not aware of a big question movement like this. But today, this is one of the central questions. Now, which think tank, which policy think tank has the understanding of Bharatiya culture, the metaphysics of Dharma, the understanding of the socio-cultural organization, the economic dimensions, the spiritual, aesthetic, architectural, philosophical, and economic dimensions of a temple? This is a very, very complex issue. This is a cultural issue. Right? This either, of course, everybody can exercise their intelligence and learn about it, but there is a huge vacuum. So when we looked at purely from a public policy perspective, since you come from there, we also do cultural storytelling, which is more on the idea of directly interacting with people and helping them understand the metaphors and allegories of our culture. But if you look at this, you clearly need that space. Today, all of you are looking for answers. Samvaad itself is looking for answers on specific civilizational issues. And that has to be met by policy response. It cannot just be a dialogue that we're having in a campus. This has to consolidate towards a very coherent and a very specific ask that the government can execute. So things like this is what prompted us to set up Brhat. We are a culture research organization. We focus on three things. We do cultural storytelling, and I'll talk a little bit about, maybe in the next question I can explain why we do that. But cultural storytelling is not enough unless you also combine that with policy research and give specific solutions. So we do policy research, particularly in education and going forward in ecology as well. And thirdly, we invest in people. We work with young people to develop leadership potential in them for a civilizational cause. We do this through direct courses that we offer on civilizational issues, and also mentoring support and just being there to have a dialogue.
Bṛhat is a cultural engine that bridges the gap between yearning and realization. How exactly can Bṛhat achieve that?
Thank you. Once again, I'm very happy that you guys took time to go through what we've written, and that's a delight because we wrote what we wrote on the Bṛhat website with a lot of passion and conviction, but we wrote a lot as well. So there is sometimes a concern that maybe not everything is being read or reflected upon and understood. So it's actually a delight for me to hear a question based on something that we've written. We said this is a civilizational movement. That's where the yearning to converting that yearning into something consolidated comes into picture. So we said there is a civilizational movement. What is this civilizational movement composed of? Think of any cultural phenomenon, anything that you can think of has attracted your attention. Firstly, there is generally a sense of awareness. You become aware of a certain topic, of a certain impulse, of a certain idea, of a certain intent. Right? You see this within yourself as well, and you start sharing that, and you find resonance in people to the idea that you're carrying. Now, this starts out like a spark like this. This is the play of time, right? But from a yearning, you actually get into, it becomes a tipping point. It becomes a cultural phenomenon based on certain other things. You get some hero moments. You have sparks who suddenly rise up, and their actions, their personality, their work sort of galvanizes the entire attention towards that one idea. Right? So you then get what we call a critical mass, or some kind of diffused attention towards that issue. Once that happens, you need dissemination mechanisms because the ideas start consolidating. You get books, you get songs, you get movies. If you look at the Indian civilizational discourse and if you examine what's happening now, we are transforming from the naive phase to the sophisticated phase. In fact, we've written this. That is why we said we have a Shatrubodh and Swayambodh framework, because it's very important for everyone entering this discourse to have their own terrain map, to have their own way to navigate through the compass that we can provide, which is about what to read, who to read, for what, how much to take, when not to take. This is a learning process. This is a process of developing our own critical thinking faculties. It is a process of developing our own self-awareness. So once that is sufficiently developed, then you would see that the hero movements start leading to other enterprises. It then becomes a real institutionalized agency. And once that happens, you get stories. And it is through stories that mass collaboration is possible. This is the story of humanity as we understand it as well, right? We have an evolutionary advantage because we are able to tell stories, and through stories, myths, and symbols, we are able to architect large-scale collaboration. So, if you look at it, how do we convert this yearning into an epochal movement? We said we have a civilizational movement. We have the responsibility of transforming that into an epoch. It needs storytellers. It needs hero movements. It needs institutions who are extremely focused on diffusing this kind of intent, permeating the entire public discourse with our cultural consciousness. And once that is there, we all need to have collective stories that we can all anchor on. So that's the idea of converting the movement into an epoch, or how we plan or how we think the yearning that all of us share can be converted into something substantial. It is not going to be easy. This is intergenerational work, right? We are absolutely clear, and we have no illusion that this is going to be just done in a year or two. But we are all playing in the lap of nature, and when nature creates a certain kind of force, when Shakti decides it's time, it's time.
Shouldn't we outsource policy making to transnational NGOs or elite institutions that have the capacity for the required intellectual churn?
Let's think about this question, right? What are we saying? Uh, Imagine ourselves before 1947. If the Britishers were to tell us that in a country like India, since you do not have the experience of running a democratic government yourself, is it not better to just have Britishers continue doing that for us? Right? It is the same line of argument. Firstly, it is not rocket science, and we are good at rocket science. There is no reason why we feel that we cannot carry out our own policy making. There is no reason to feel that we are not competent to actually handle our own governance matters. It is not just an incorrect and inadequate assessment, it is also a dangerous one. We have to understand that colonialism is not just about settler uh, colonials, right? It also pervades through many different institutions even today. That is what we call the colonization of the mind. Right? And there are many instruments that have been created to permeate the same kind of domination. And it is not in national interest for any country, forget a country of size, importance, significance, and civilizational stature of India, for any country to be outsourcing strategic thinking and policy making to any other transnational agency, because they do not serve your national interests. It is as simple as that. If we do feel, and it's also important, I understand the spirit of this question, that we must have certain competencies that we probably don't see in abundance today. That is just a matter for us to work upon. If you are able to lead the biggest multinational corporations in the world, if Indians are able to really excel in all the fields, why is it that we are not able to think of governing ourselves with our own paradigms and our own policies and our own cultural priorities? It just means that we haven't focused on that enough, or we haven't had the institutional mechanisms to get into contact with that, which is what we are going through now. All of us are having this conversation itself, this awareness that there is a transnational elite who is imposing public policy through different agencies. You're asking me this question because there is a dialogue around this. That awareness is the spark. Once we are sufficiently aware, then the problem of actually dealing with our own solutions is just a matter of exercising our mind, and we are brilliant at it. Don't let anyone ever tell you that we are not good enough to govern ourselves.
Given that the state's nature prevents the resolution of most civilizational issues, isn't it counterproductive to help the state with ventures like the Indian Knowledge Systems?
So this is very important. I'm glad you guys brought this up. Indian state is a moral one. It is a fantastic development. Without that, you actually cannot have a civilization. Let's be very clear about this, right? This idea that we are against the state comes from a very different worldview, which looks at history and, in fact, the entire course of human development as just the oppressor oppressed kind of narrative. That is not who we are. When we talk about dharmic metaphysics, that is not who we are when we talk about an Indic Renaissance. We understand the criticality of a state like institution, and we absolutely have complete solidarity, respect, and ultimate passion for the Indian state, as much as it is about our civilization. We understand that the state is an instrument to advance the civilizational goals that we have. The state is the upholder of the nation, so we need this. So it's not. It is absolutely incorrect to say that the Indian state is an impediment. We have certain issues. Unfortunately, because of the history we've had, because of the nature of our transition, because of the geographical location that we find ourselves in, and many other unique things that make for a complex polity, we are not able to exercise our full power. There are three dimensions to this that we need to get right, which is identity, the question of who we are, the question of stability, right, about how do we come together as a collective under the institutional set of the architecture that we create and exercise our full potential, and how do we use that to generate prosperity. Now, we've come some distance in the last 75 years, but there is now a massive awakening about the question of identity, about who we are. And that is always going to be an intellectual churn, which will then lead to certain social consolidation about who we are and what are the instruments that we need. And those instruments will always be through the state, which is why it is our focus as well to think about public policy. We're not thinking about a revolution. We're thinking about using instruments of the state, but making sure that they also have the understanding of our cultural backdrop, that they understand what is our civilizational metaphysics. They understand the real impulse of the people of our land. They understand the genius of Indian civilization in blending the philosophy very, very seamlessly into everyday culture. When you see that, when you make, this is a civilization that has given you the idea of Rajadharma. And it said the sum total of all governance or knowledge is governance. This is what Mahabharata tells you. So the impact that the state can have and the respect the civilization has for a state-like institution to execute our common goals has always been there. So the job of supplying Indian state with Indian knowledge system based frameworks is just to make sure that the state is representing the aspirations that we naturally have as a civilization, and with full respect and recognition that you cannot do without the instrument called state.
What is Bṛhat cultural engine all about?
Yeah, so as I said, and I'm glad you guys refer to our website and this idea of culture engine that we're trying to propagate, because we do engage with a lot of things. We are focused on three things, but all of that is based on a certain strategy and a certain idea. Of course, it has its own assumptions baked into it. That we are passing through a phase, not just in the Indian context, but in the global context, where there is a tremendous search for meaning. There is a surge in questions of identity, about who we are, what is our collective future. But this is being largely mediated by the aesthetics of digital mediums in some cases, and aesthetics of narratives in many, many cases. What do we mean by this? There is a very subliminal psychological process of how tastes, values, and behaviors are shaped by what we consume. Now, if you think about, this is called, in fact, it's a very interesting theory called the motorcycle aesthetic. If you think about the idea of a drive, right? Immediately in our mind, there is this imagination of people riding a motorbike and the landscape being neat and clean, you're passing through the alleys. These kind of photos, this kind of imagery, this kind of narrative is what creates the idea of a motorcycle drive in our mind. Are you guys able to relate to this? But that is not how the real roads are. This image of the motorcycle driving has created an idea of a flat earth. It has created an idea, an image, association of beautiful landscapes. And we think that is how it is. This is the subliminal psychological process that happens. So you need civilizational aesthetics to rewire our own imaginations to our culture, which means that you need to develop new stories, you need to actually supply our own metaphors, you need to make sure that our people have access to our idiom, our allegories in our languages, which is when we are a coherent whole self, that our ideas, images, and the environment that we operate in are all in tandem. So one part of the work that we do at Bṛhat is to create this cultural awareness at a very subliminal level. that you are able to, the next time you go through a situation in life, any of you, and inevitably all of us will go through certain situations in life. It could be joy, it could be pain, it could be ecstasy, it could be anxiety. What is that story that comes to your mind that gives you meaning? All of us need that. There is a voice in our heads. When we are going for that PhD examination, when you are going for that interview, when you are going for that important meeting that you have, whether you experience success or you have some butterflies in your stomach because you're anxious, you have a story about yourself in your mind. Currently, the story is not being supplied by our images or our words or our metaphors. Our work at the cultural storytelling level is to supply the metaphors, words, meanings to our own voices in our heads. Once we do that, then there is a bit of coherence. For example, if today, let's say you're going through a situation in life and you hear a story that Ramji raye the ye jagah pe, tab unko, he felt this. The same situation, same emotion that you are feeling. These emotions are universal. The situations are universal. That is the condition that we have. But when he came here, he went through this situation and he overcame it by doing this. Suddenly that place assumes a personal significance for you. You have an endowment on it because it is talking your story. So the next time something happens to that place, you are more likely to stand up and respond to it because you have a personal association. So when we say why don't Indians, appear to take care of their culture, it's because we've lost that association. Right? So to rewire that association, to tell us about our kshetras, about our tirthas, about our devatas, about our festivals, about our utsavs, about our food, about our culture, in a way that it can personally resonate with us, that we stand up and care for it, that we collectively organize ourselves to do something about it. Not because it is just a political thing, but it is because we are deeply associated with it. It is our life. That is part one. But think of this as the demand generation for cultural policy. But it cannot be sort of institutionalized unless you provide research for the state to act on it. The society and state need to come together and work on this. It's very, very critical that we don't look at this as opposing forces. The society has to create the demand for cultural policy, and the state has to have the means of providing that cultural policy. So the next idea, the work that we do, is actually to make sure that state has some frameworks, at least in education, at least in ecology, to think about certain policy, right? But all of this does not work out unless you have people like you who have that chetana, who have that embodied consciousness that you need to do something about it. So the third pillar of our work, if you look at our website, is leadership development, which is about civilizational leadership. So I think that these three things need to come together. Cultural awareness through extremely strong stories. That is how humans are trained and hardwired to think. Making sure that we have policy solutions which understands the complexity of running a state in a globalized world, but all of that embodied in people.